Can you describe what challenges you have in your organization?
Our journey really began once upon a time just using a very basic open source Istio Envoy configuration in Kubernetes clusters built in EC2 with kops. And for that, to be quite honest, most of the knowledge of Istio at that time and our usage was very limited to simply using Istio as an ingress with virtual services. And that's about where it ended. We weren't utilizing all of the features and functionalities of Istio. We weren't doing anything in depth with Envoy as well. It occupied the space that was fairly opaque, where it was frustrating to both our application development teams because they were trying to do things and interact with it, and they simply were not able to get up to speed on the things that they did. It also had an organizational effort from our part about, the limitation was exactly who could we devote to that task and devote to the building of it. We can't devote half of our team to simply building this out of the open source means available. As we've expanded and as we've grown, there's been a particular focus on security implementations, and also in terms of automation and management of certain aspects of, for instance, a service mesh or service mesh components within our clusters. One of the things that became a very solid requirement for us was to have managed MTLS within our clusters, to be able to encrypt traffic, to also be able to authenticate services, and to be able to have machine-to-machine authorization as well as a requirement for our platform. Many companies still rely upon password-based credentials for basic authorization, and we wanted to move away from that. And in particular, with a long-term goal of moving toward a zero trust environment, to be able to ensure everything from regulatory requirements to also just better secure our own environments as we move forward. With some of the challenges we faced on the organizational side is, who do you have on your end to be able to support you moving toward that? In many ways, this is a very new and very highly advanced technologies that we're working with. And you don't often find either the depth of knowledge or the specific domain knowledge available within your organization to sort of go it alone and build out your own services and your own systems. Or if you do, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of, sort of missteps, and it's a very steep learning curve in many ways.
Why did you pick Solo?
One of the challenges that we faced was when we were actually assessing service mesh providers or vendors, we had been in a bad situation in the past where we had relied upon support that simply never materialized. And we were never able to build that solid relationship that we wanted with the vendor to be there with us and help us and see us as not just another customer or another client, but as a partner moving forward to enhance the platform, to have that kind of cross-fertilization of ideas, that kind of interactive development, moving forward, improving our own systems, but also improving the product as well and improving the offering. We began then looking for alternatives, evaluated a few different alternatives. For instance, just in general and industry-wide in the scope, if your needs require something that's very lightweight, something like Linkerd would be fine, Linkerd 2. Something lighter weight that you can just kind of work with in a very simple way without too much complexity, without having to rely on any of the Istio or Envoy primitives and have really access to them. You can do something like that just fine. If you're tightly integrated with AWS and the AWS environment, what was an alternative that we had attempted to implement, at least in our non-production environments initially, was Amazon's App Mesh. And AWS App Mesh seemed to us like a great choice because it was simple, relatively easy to use, well integrated. The blockers that we faced were really when it came down to some of these interesting edge cases related to external authorization. And again, those requirements for very specific requirements for both on the management plane, which is for App Mesh is just, it's managed within AWS. Some of the specific requirements for either our federated trust model, we were trying to implement SPIFFE and Spire with App Mesh, We were hitting some roadblocks there. We also attempted to then really utilize external authorization through Envoy as an Envoy filter. And we found that we weren't getting the exposure that we needed to Envoy in order to be able to implement that. Specifically, there were some issues that we faced with something like forwarding the actual cert details from one listener to another. And we weren't finding that that was working for us. I'm sure everyone is well aware in the industry, there's only so far you can go working with a very large company that's on its own roadmap, that's on its own pace, that you don't have a very strong personal, almost, I would say, relationship with. As a smaller company or even a mid-sized company, it's difficult to really have that kind of strong relationship with a vendor that's just so massive and they do things on such a large scale. They're not able to adjust to a lot of the cases or even feature requests or other things like that might be brought up. And so when evaluating an alternative then from AppMesh as a pivot, we went back to some of the alternatives with AppMesh, GRD2, again in a lighter weight sense. Aspen Mesh was another one that we had looked at. Tetrate Service Bridge was another that we had looked at. And what we found was that with Solo itself and with GlueMesh, the responsiveness of the support, the focus on building these partnerships with the actual customers and clients, to see it as an interactive relationship rather than simply you pay us money and we give you this thing and maybe we implement the features you need or want, or maybe we don't, and that will change your plans as well. One of the reasons why, after we were assessing a number of different options available, why we went with Solo and GlueMesh is in particular that level of support that was available, that level of domain-specific knowledge and expertise that was available, which other products or offerings or services didn't necessarily provide for us. It's based upon open source components underneath. True, Istio and Envoy are open source components. What value then do you get from going to enterprise support? The way that I approached that problem from that cost perspective was, simply put, if we took the same amount of resources, money, that we would allocate to an enterprise agreement and relationship with Solo and hired engineers, would we be able to achieve the same product with the same complexity, meeting all of our hard requirements, meeting all of that? And as well, would we have access to the same very highly technical domain-specific knowledge from the engineers at Solo? And would we be able to retain them on a permanent basis, almost through a variety of onboarding or on-calls or anything else like that for your entire organization, and be able to keep that pace going without any external support? If you're a large enough organization, absolutely, that makes sense. If you're a mid-sized organization, you may need to just do a little bit of math and say, this is not necessarily an open source versus enterprise question. It's more of a question of the access that it would give you to really domain-specific experts in the field to be able to then advance the product and grow, and the product, knowing that the product will grow with your organization as well, rather than just simply be a product that you grab off the shelf and try to implement.
How's the experience with Solo so far?
We're still fairly early in the process of onboarding our applications to the service mesh. So far, I found Solo to be very responsive. I really appreciate the ability to have both direct sort of in-sync communications as well as asynchronous communications, where we have our own Slack channel on Solo's Slack. We also have access to then the other public channels within that, being able as well to reach out and have engineers who are familiar with our company, who are familiar with our organization, who we interact with on a frequent basis rather than sort of a revolving door of engineers. That's important. Being able to also work with engineers with specific use cases and scenarios, or even bugs that we will find, or additions and improvements that we might notice. And I think we've, in particular, because of the way that our environment is set up, we've hit quite a few interesting edge cases that it's been, a unique experience being able to interact with Solo engineers to be able to resolve that. being able to work with us on that. Also, the absolute depth of knowledge and domain-specific knowledge that's available with the engineers at Solo is just incredible. We're using GlueMesh Enterprise. One of the things that we also appreciate with that is GlueMesh gateways that are part of that, because we didn't need all of the functionality of Glue Edge, but we definitely can use some of the functionality of it. And that functionality from Glue Edge is inherited within GlueMesh Gateway as part of the Enterprise GlueMesh service mesh. Our main priorities and our main focus for service mesh itself is to be able to secure our internal network, make sure that we can have appropriate service-to-service authentication and machine-to-machine authorization that's done in a fairly consistent and manageable way. Overall, it's been a very positive experience so far. Very responsive team at Solo. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with Solo, thinking of it again as building our own organization in kind of a symbiotic way with the service mesh as a platform, and seeing where it can go from that. So I'm excited, and it's been a very healthy and functional relationship. You value each one of your customers as a partner, and I think that's where the difference comes across. I deeply appreciate the fact that Solo is willing to see the value in smaller, more dynamic companies, leaner companies that are out there doing really amazing things and really trying to push the envelope, rather than just saying, well, we're just going to focus our entire model on courting these larger agencies or organizations. So far, we're very happy with the decision.